My mother kept a locked trunk in her room. None of us were allowed near it. She guarded it like a dragon guards its fire. When she died, I thought grief would bind my sisters and me. Instead, they circled her like vultures. The night we lowered her into the ground, they rushed her bedroom. Drawers were ripped open, closets thrown wide, floorboards pried up. When they found her velvet-lined cases, the jewelry spilled across their palms like molten light, $16 million worth, necklaces that had kissed her throat, rings that had bitten her skin. A legacy of gold and diamonds that should have carried her love forward. They barely glanced at me. One of them laughed and said, "You get the trunk," as if I'd been handed scraps. I carried it to my room like a beggar with an empty bowl. Humiliation sat heavy. I hated that I cared, the shame burned so deep it hollowed me. When I broke it open, the lock surrendered to a stack of old letters tied with twine, my name on every envelope in my mother's tight, deliberate hand. I tore one open. The first line stopped my breath. "You were never supposed to be raised by them. Your real family is." My hands shook. The room tilted. For years I had thought my sisters resented me for being the youngest, the quiet one. Maybe their contempt was deeper. Maybe they had always known. I devoured the letters. Each one peeled back a truth I'd been blind to. I wasn't her daughter, not really. My birth parents were wealthy industrialists who died in a plane crash. The woman I called mother had been their housekeeper. In the chaos after the crash, she'd taken me, claimed me as her own, raised and protected me in secret, and never told me. My sisters had always known. That explained why they shut me out of every decision, every inheritance. To them I was never blood, just a mistake in their house. Humiliation curdled into something sharper and clean. If they treated me like a stranger, I decided I would become one, a stranger with no mercy. I began to plan in silence. I learned about my birth family's trusts, companies, offshore accounts. All I needed was proof of identity. Those letters were more than words, they were evidence. I hired a lawyer in another city and paid him with the little savings I had. Quiet. Discreet. While my sisters flaunted diamonds at galas, I traced signatures, unearthed records, requested DNA tests from a lock of my birth mother's hair preserved in an archive. 3 months. That's how long it took to build the case. 3 months of smiling while they mocked me, sitting quietly at dinners as they boasted about auction houses begging for our mother's jewels. They thought I was invisible. Invisibility is the sharpest blade. When everything was ready, I petitioned the court to unseal my birth records. The letters, DNA, and testimony from a surviving family associate made the truth undeniable. Overnight, my identity changed. I was no longer the outsider. I was the rightful heir to a fortune far greater than the baubles my sisters had looted. But exposure alone felt small. Revenge without spectacle is just restitution. I wanted their collapse to echo. I timed it perfectly. At the annual charity gala, the one where my sisters pranced in gowns stitched with arrogance, I arrived with my lawyer and a court order. The room glittered with chandeliers and whispers, cameras flashed. The host handed me the microphone expecting a donation. Instead, I delivered revelation. I told the story my mother never had the courage to tell, how I'd been stolen as a baby, how my sisters grew fat on jewels while I was fed lies. I held up the letters, the DNA results, the legal decree. Gasps cracked the room like gunfire. One sister's painted face drained of color, a champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered on marble. Then I struck the final, legal blow. The jewelry they flaunted wasn't theirs. Legally, it belonged to me, every necklace, every ring, every blood-stained diamond. The audience turned on them like wolves. Reporters scribbled. Investors slipped away. Donors pulled checks. Their empire began crumbling before mascara had time to smear. Banks froze accounts. Auction houses withdrew offers. Friends vanished. My lawyer filed for immediate repossession of assets tied to my identity. They tried to fight, to smear me as a fraud, but paper doesn't lie and DNA doesn't lie. Truth, once freed, burns through deception like acid. I didn't scream or curse. I watched as they lost everything and begged for mercy from the sister they had humiliated. I gave them none. Now the trunk sits in my study, polished and unassuming, its lock repaired. It no longer feels like a symbol of humiliation. It is a tombstone for the life I was forced into, for years stolen from me. Sometimes I run my fingers over its surface and remember the moment I broke it open, that single crack of metal that changed everything. They thought they'd buried me alive when they left me with it. They didn't know it was the shovel I used to dig their graves. I don't mourn them. Not anymore. I feel a calm satisfaction, precise and cold as cut glass. Justice didn't come from the jewels or the fortune, it came from the silence that followed their downfall, the empty space where their laughter used to echo. In that silence I hear my mother's real voice, the one I never knew, telling me I was never meant to live small or be forgotten. I was meant to rise, and I did. If you liked this story and want more like it, hit like and subscribe to Echoes of Betrayal, new stories every week.